we have CIA agents trying to undermine the government of Iran. Another regime change. We get involved in elections, and I want that to be fully known. Of course, I want it to be stopped, to tell you the truth. I mean, it was the CIA that was involved with Diem being taken out in Vietnam, and it was our CIA that helped put in the Shah, which the Iranians still remember. And, the Iran-Contra, CIA-type activities. So I think all that stuff should be either stopped or absolutely open, except for the very, very necessary military secrets. But this idea that the government can be hiding behind, executive privilege and not have to reveal what they're doing, I think is very bad.
And the sunlight rule, could you just touch base on that?
Well, I probably have to refresh my memory a little bit there, but just the sunlight rule is just to make sure that the American people know exactly what's happening.
Okay, I guess maybe that's the wrong term. I thought you would file legislation that set I believe it was a 10-day period before Congress could act on legislation. They'd have to.
Oh, okay, that on the legislative side.
The legislative side.
Oh, yes. Yes, and we have proposed that, and I sort of support the idea that congressmen ought to read the bills, and that was the time element, and some old-fashioned ideas like that. And I do that more to make a point because how would you compel them to do it? And there's always a way to get around it. You could do that and have the legislation. Then the principle of the manager's amendment. This is what happens so often. We could have that, and it makes a point, but it's not the answer. Because you can have a piece of legislation. They did this with the Patriot Act. The House worked on a Patriot Act, which wasn't nearly as bad as the Senate version. Then the Senate was working on a version. Then it came time for us to look at it, and the House just threw theirs out the window, which we had been working on and studying, and gave us something very close to what the Senate was doing, but they gave it to us an hour or so before it happened. Hopefully you'd think that could stop it, but you'd have to reverse all the rules of the House of the Manager's Amendment, which was originally intended to make minor corrections. We're going to change this phrase and clarify this and sort of thing. But now the Manager's Amendment can come down and change the whole bill. So these things don't get solved unless you have ethical people in government, that will live up to what they're supposed to be doing. But the legislation of this 10 days is to make that point. That's what we ought to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, if you don't win the Republican nomination, would you run again as a Libertarian in the general election?
I have no intention of doing that. No, this is not my plan.
How about as an independent?
Not my plan.
Congressman, this is another question I ask a lot of the candidates, and I'm particularly interested because you're a doctor, how you feel about the medical use of marijuana.
The medical use of marijuana, I'm for it. And for it for medical reasons and for it for political reasons. People ought to be able to make their own choices. And for it for constitutional reasons. And that is, there shouldn't be any thou shalt nots by the federal government that somebody can't smoke or drink something. It didn't make sense. At least they did it properly with alcohol. They thought that's a lot of more respect for the Constitution. They amended the Constitution to tell people they can't drink alcohol. Then they removed, they repealed the amendment. But no, in 1938 they said, marijuana could be bad for you. That's how recent it's been. 1938 they wanted to overtax it so people wouldn't use it. But the principle is that in a free society, people should be able to make up their own mind what they put in their bodies, whether it's nutritional substances or whether they're smoking medical marijuana. But the states have a right to regulate it. But in a state like California or wherever, if they legalize it, it should be legal. But here, the federal government is going in and superseding everything the state has done, arresting these people who are in wheelchairs. You remember that one person, I think he was suffering from muscular dystrophy, and asked one of the candidates, would you arrest me? And he couldn't even say, no, I wouldn't arrest you and put you in jail. He said, I don't want you to have that right to do that, which means I'd enforce the law. And that's compassionate conservatism. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the prisons are full. And we have federal laws that tell people who use these medications never committed a violent crime. And they have mandatory lifetime sentences. At the same time, you see rapists and child molesters getting out on the street. I mean, where's our common sense? And these are people who are sick. And people who have addictions are sick, like alcoholics. We don't round up alcoholics and put them in prison. But if an alcoholic kills somebody on a highway, they should be put in prison. Same way with drugs, if they do. But
so are you also for just legalization of marijuana outside of medical use as well?
Well, that would be my belief, but it's also up to the states to decide. Just like alcohol, there's a lot of states that prohibit children from buying alcohol, which I would support. But the thing of it is, kids we have all these laws against marijuana, and they can get marijuana easier than they can get alcohol, because you get checked for, if you walk into the 7-Eleven, you're not going to get your alcohol as easy, but you can go down the street. But there's no incentive for people to be selling alcohol, down the street. They don't bootleg alcohol because it's legal. So I think the war on drugs is close to an insane policy, the way it's being run. And if you look at the numbers, you're not talking about a few $1 million. You're talking about probably since early 70s, it might be $500 or $600 billion. And even if you weren't for federal programs, just think if you spent half of it on education, you might have, or treatment would probably be better. I wouldn't have wanted that, but it would have been an alternative policy that I would have supported. If we say, well, let's not put people in prison, let's treat them and save some money, I'd support that as a transition and move in the right direction.
Do you think that in legalizing drugs, should the states get involved in regulating and/or selling them?
Be up to the states. Some states even regulate and sell alcohol. So I see drugs as drugs, and they can do it, so they could, but I would keep the federal government out of it.
Do you see any role, in federal leadership or anything in terms of fostering energy independence in the country, and how big an issue do you think that is?
Well, in an indirect fashion, if they got out of the way, we would move toward energy independence, and the market would decide where to put the money. But when it's an active way instead of passive, you have people taking your money and saying, well, if we support the people out west that grow corn, maybe ethanol is going to solve our problems. But then it may turn out that growing ethanol is more expensive than the energy we produce. But yes, we should have alternative sources, but it can be best found in the market. Even related to the marijuana question is, for some weird reason, they came up with this idea that somebody's going to smoke hemp, but you don't smoke hemp. So we're not even allowed to raise hemp, even though that was a big product during World War II and helped us fight the war. And there's a lot of products. There's nutritional products and commercial products. They're allowed to raise it in Canada, and we're allowed to import the products. But hemp is supposed to be a pretty good source of ethanol. So we prohibit ethanol coming from hemp. We subsidize it going into corn, and we don't give the same subsidy to sugar cane, which could be done, and the Brazilians say sugar cane is better. But I'll tell you one thing, the politicians and the bureaucrats don't know. Only the market knows these answers on what they can do to solve these, sort this out, and that's why the pricing structure is so important. If the price is right and they can make money, it's going to work. And when the price of energy goes up, because if there's a true shortage, not an artificial shortage that we create by fighting wars over there. We went over there to save our oil, and oil was $28 a barrel when the Iraqi war started, and I'll look at it. And I think that's part of the reason why it's $100 today, is because of the threat going into Iran. Price, though, would help us decide what to do. Whether solar energy is feasible, nuclear energy, I think, is really a good way to go and it's the safest fuel. It's a lot safer than any hydrocarbons, and we may be driving electric cars if we run out of oil. And
you wouldn't want to place either offer government incentives or place disincentives on certain energy sources to push the market in one way. You just want to leave this completely up.
Passive incentives, that is, I would give tax credits to anybody who wants to, invest to get some of their own money back. Of course, I don't want to take their money in the first place, but if we take it, and somebody who wants to do research in renewable energy, I'd give tax credits, but not